Hour is here. We'll call to order this meeting of the Washington County Extension Discussion Program. I can't remember exactly what our official title is. Anyway, we have all present here today. Welcome, everybody. The clerk's office has posted notice of this meeting in accordance with the protocols. We'll stand for a moment of solemn meditation and the Pledge of Allegiance, please.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Before we get underway here this morning, I want to thank everyone for giving up the time to join us. I realize some people have got some obligations this morning. If you have to leave, leave. Hopefully we can be done with this on time. As to speaking here, there will be periods of time for general questions. Those on the committee members will go first. For those of you in the gallery, please raise your hand to be acknowledged. If you have something to say, identify yourself and please come to the podium. The purpose of this session today is to ask a lot of questions to come to a group consensus on recommendations to forward to the county executive. Eventually, our thoughts and his will find their way to the entire county board for further action. During some of the comments this morning, I am sure we will hear some that are not necessarily always positive or complimentary. Let me tell everyone in advance, none of this discussion has come about because of the fault of anyone currently working with Extension in Washington County. These people are highly qualified, well-trained, and completely professional in their roles. Some of them have become our friends, and we want nothing said or implied that is disparaging to them as individual or their professional performances. As I said, our goal today is simple: to explore options to maintain or enhance education and other programs being offered to our residents that may use county funds to preclude involvement from UW Extension. Feel free to ask questions and be candid, please, within the bounds of proper decorum. We have a lot on the agenda today from the email communications you received yesterday. I think that's evident. And there was also a message that went out last evening from Lee Delcor with the County 4-H Leaders Association. Hopefully you had a chance to read that. If not, there may be reference to that today. During the time this morning, both Jamie and I will lead the discussion, but we're going to start off with Jamie this morning.
Consent agenda first.
I'm sorry?
Consent agenda.
Oh, that's right. I'm sorry. Consent agenda. I will entertain a motion for acceptance of the minutes from the April 4th meeting of this group. Motion, please. Motion, Mr. Gallitz, second by Mr. Berg. Are there any questions or comments? If not, we'll vote on this. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. Now, at this point, thank you. We will get on with comments from Ms. Ludovic to open the discussion. Jamie?
Yes, thank you. Good morning. My name is Jamie Ludovic, Chief Community Development Officer for Washington County. I want to just start by reiterating what Supervisor Mary said about the exceptional experience that both I have, and I know our Mike Bodie, who also worked on this, had with Cindy Sarkady, our Area Extension Director, in the assistance that she providing materials throughout this task force meeting, as well as all of the other UW Extension personnel that came and supported these conversations professionally and really did a great job, I believe, providing information for this task force's consideration. I think that we believe that it is, again, to reiterate what he said, not a result of our team here in Washington County, any of the conversation that happens today, because these individuals really are trying to do the best they can for our community. And I think that's something we've heard this task force say. Second, I want to emphasize that, again, the role of this task force, it was a county executive task force to evaluate UW Extension as it relates to higher education. So everything and as we're getting towards formulating recommendations and ideas today is a recommendation. right? And so thinking that through as you're putting forward kind of verbiage or thoughts of how collectively we want to articulate some of the ideas or speaking points that you've come up with. I say that because there may be some more specific actions or tasks or tangible things that this task force really isn't going to get into, right? So what will happen after this meeting is there'll be, we'll get to conclusion next steps that the task force wants to see, but the recommendation will go back to the county executive, and then there will be, conversations about what and if any of these are implemented or what that looks like. So that's really not a conversation we'll be getting into today related to things like timeline or specificity or this or that, because we just really don't know if those things will happen. So we're trying to kind of formulate the big picture ideas in policy that will help inform kind of what those next steps are. What we did here, and our legislative analyst, is that right, Mike?
Yeah.
Legislative clerk, has kind of been in conversation. Many of you have sent him comments. So I know he received written comments from Task Force Member Johnson, from Supervisor Gallitz. I had a conversation with Lee Delcourt, and then I know there was a meeting with Carol Mary and some conversation with others. And so what we thought would be helpful, and really it was just that intent to try to be helpful to today's conversation and provide some direction to it, was we kind of assembled a list of bullet points that we thought were things that came up or that we heard in those conclusions that we were planning to walk through essentially. And so what we're really looking for is, is there consensus on this bullet point? Is this language reflective of what the task force would like to see? Do we want to not have this? Is this not a conclusion point? Is there things that need to be added? Are there other areas we want to explore? So again, we just wanted to provide a starting point based on the feedback we heard, so that there would be, some way to go through this meeting in a somewhat structured way. So the first one, and I'm going to kick this back to Carol Mary to kind of walk us through these until we get to the third bullet.
Before we do that, Jamie, can I ask a question? I was going to save this till the end, but I think now is the time to talk about it as we go through our discussion this morning. What should we expect from your office or Mike regarding recommendations from the task force once we're done with our conversation today? Then what happens and when? Are you going to document recommendations, and then are we expecting this group will meet again, or are we going to try to wrap things up today? Just your thoughts.
I think we have that as the last point of consideration, to really have the task force discuss how they want to see that happen. We are taking notes. We will be writing up the recommendations as a result of this conversation. And so I think it depends on if the task force feels that they're in a position where, they would want to see that language again finalized, or if they would be comfortable with the conversation forwarding that, report informally on in what they decide they want to look for the next steps.
Okay, thank you. I just want to,
Yep.
I'm sure that's probably in the back of everybody's mind as to how long is this going to go on? And so let's just have that discussion right. That's not what now, so we get that call. So, all right. Now, you all should have received the bullet points, UW Extension Task Force. I had some discussion with Mike and Jamie yesterday on this, and there's been some other inputs onto this. Some of this you're going to recognize as perhaps some of your own comments. But we just want to go through these bullet points one at a time. The conversation on some might be very short. The conversation might be rather lengthy. Bullet point number 1. The task force recognizes the contribution of all UW Extension educators and respects their role. Any outcome of the task force is not reflective on educators' execution in their role. Rather, is an overall review of UW Extension programming and alignment with Washington County's strategic priorities. I think this is something I tried to mention in my comments, and Jamie did as well. I would like to think the consensus of this group is to be that, yeah, the group we've got right now have been, some have left, great professionals to work with. If you've had any relationships or personal opportunities to work with the group. But as we said before, I think that the The UW Extension team that has been working with Washington County is outstanding. And if anyone has any other comments to add to that, we'll welcome those. Otherwise, I'd just like to go on record such that is reported. With the team itself we've been working with is absolutely outstanding. This has nothing to do with any individual or group performances. This is all about budgetary and what we're considering the role of the UW Extension in Washington County. Any other comments or questions on that? All right, let's go to the second point. The 7 members of the task force will examine the current funds dedicated to UW Extension and review how best to meet the changing needs of our local community, including agricultural producers and businesses, and prioritize the funding accordingly. And I think at this point in time, we segue over to Aaron, and you've got a sheet that was part of the packet. You wanted to walk us through this, Aaron, because we're going to talk about budget. This is the time to do it.
Sure. Good morning. Sure, I know everyone. My name is Aaron Dahl. I'm the Chief Administrative Officer here.
Aaron,
So,
hold the microphone closer, please. They'll just direct it there. Talk into it. Thank you.
all right, sure thing. So the sheet you have in front of you is just sort of a summary of the adopted budget. So starting on the left are just sort of the categories that we use. We've broken up even down to the line item level for your review. We rolled up personnel just because there's a boatload of smaller costs in there, but the categories are on the left. In the center is the adopted budget. The dollars are sort of in the left column of that middle section, and then there are some notes for personnel. You'll note that the top line there is the county funded personnel. When I say county funded, I mean funded outside of the contract. Moving down in those center columns, there's a line there for that state 136 contract, and there you'll see, an arrow pointing to another chart on the bottom left there that I believe you've seen that before. That comes from the 136 contract itself. Those are the components of that contract. The numbers essentially that get you to that $192,000 number that's in the budget. And then, you continue to move down and you've got just the normal things that we budget: supplies, travel and training. We've got our interdepartmental charges, which is the rent in the space over there across the street at the PAC, as well as, our normal IT and telephone and copying and things like that. So, that's sort of just to give you a glimpse into that budget and how it's built and the line items within. And then on the far right is sort of just this isn't on an envelope, but it's sort of a back of the envelope type calculation, right? Of sort of what it would take to provide a minimum level of 4-H. I believe some of these numbers may be slightly understated because we're just pulling components off of that 136 contract. We don't know if that's, actually an option or what additional costs might come with that. But at this point, we just sort of plug some basic assumptions in there just to show what a new budget might look like. For example, a couple of the lines in there, the rent and the IT charges, those things are sort of calculated and locked in. And even if, we repurposed that space or did something, whatever it would be, but the levy savings aren't there for the county. So we left them there just so that we don't miss those costs as savings in error or something like that. And so that's sort of an explanation of what this sheet is. I'm happy to answer any specific questions. One thing, continuing down to the bottom right, there's just sort of some summary charts there. The bottom portion is in addition to the minimum 4-H calculation that we did, that $189,000. There was a second scenario was sort of sketched out here, including the addition of an intern and an estimate for some additional program staffing, sort of calling that an enhanced 4-H. So, that's just another scenario, another example that we included in this sheet. So I'm happy to answer any questions. Jamie was with me when we put this together, so some of the scenarios I think were maybe in her head a little bit more than mine, so.
I'll just add that, and then that really feeds directly into the next two bullets you're gonna talk about, which is what 4-H related, recommendations or comments do you want to formalize? And so we sketched out those scenarios based on a couple of the conversations that we've been having, a conversation that I had about the idea of, either shifting current personnel to 4-H or potentially adding 4-H, but again, adding a person. But again, I think for the purposes of this task force, it's really, at the higher level of, is that something you want to take a look at? I don't know that we need to dive into specifics of, exactly what that personnel looks like. That's something your staff can do, or the county, should the county executive choose to move forward with that recommendation. So that's kind of was just to help put some shapes around at a high level what that's doing to the dollars, and then break up the remaining educators as we move through these bullets. So that's really kind of just background. And again, was done only to try to provide some assistance to the conversation. So with that, Chair, if you want to move to the third bullet, I think, bullet 3 and 4 really kind of gets at this discussion a little bit further.
One question before we get to that. We're looking up here at the 2024 adopted budget, which is $391,902. And if let's just assume we're going to go with an enhanced 4-H program, we're really talking about available funding, as I understand it, of $148,080. Is that correct?
Again, yeah, assuming, you went with an option that looked like that hypothetically, right? You would have a budget reduction of that amount.
But again, to reemphasize, that is a concept number at this point, right? So
I realize
depending on the personnel or who is hired or what that shakes out to be, it's just a ballpark.
That's a number to have in mind as we think about expanding programs. What might we have available to do that? Something in that range is what we're talking about.
Right, and there hasn't been a detailed conversation about exactly what, for example, exactly what postage is, right? There could be a scenario where that $600 is all 4-H camp mailings, right? And so that wouldn't change, but something else might change. So it is just a concept for the sizability of this discussion.
It's an approximation to keep in mind as we go. All right, then let's go down to the third bullet point. The 4-H youth development is as much about Washington County's history as it is about the future. I remember reading this in somebody's notes. 4-H will continue to be supported financially by the county board. That has already been predetermined in some of the board conversations and discussion. Anything further on that in terms of discussion points here? I mean, we're committed to maintain 4-H. Is that correct?
Yeah, foregone conclusion in mind.
Yes, I mean, that's the real key here. Wisconsin 4-H is premier youth development in the state, and efforts should be made to enhance human and financial resources supporting this program and enhance the communication between program decision makers and local representatives to ensure local priorities remain a critical driver of program information. Jamie, is this where we go into the enhanced 4-H?
Well, this is the shot at the higher level, right? That is informing that kind of that direction of, generally speaking, we would like to see enhancements to 4-H. But there's also embodied within this, there was also a conversation about, there's also a Lee Delcour's letter from the Leaders Board. There's also, a conversation about, there was some conversation about this at the AIG listening sessions related to the relevancy of 4-H locally. So there's a variety of points throughout this task force that are really all, there's an attempt to summarize that, but this is again, really at your pleasure, how you want to see this recommendation.
Chair Mayor.
Yes, sir.
If you would allow me.
Please.
So a little opining here and then and a little suggestion. We can't boil the ocean, right? We just can't do it. If we're being tasked to take on higher education, a 4-year degree, 2-year degree, the tech college, et cetera, how do we feed the data? That's not our place, right? I think we all agree with that. I think we all agree that there's issues with higher education in this country and where its focus is, and there's a few comments in here about UW extension, whether it's relevant or not, whether it's underutilized. My opinion, it's underutilized. The constituents I've spoken to, almost zero had any idea there was UW extension. So how relevant is it today? I don't know. It doesn't appear very relevant. But for purposes of this discussion, a couple things that I was thinking about, if we're talking about expanding 4-H and reaching our students and helping our students meet educational needs of today and the future, does 4-H help serve that purpose? And how can 4-H be expanded to help serve that purpose? So think about all of us in our specific jobs or industries that we work in, and what those critical skills are needed today and what are going to be needed tomorrow. And does 4-H create an additional opportunity outside of formal education, right? K through 12. And I would argue it does. Either it goes to a different direction or it enhances it. Or in some cases it introduces other concepts or skills that traditional K-12 may not. So if we're trying to serve some of our community and our businesses, think about those businesses in our community, and can 4-H help expand that? The STEM program, we heard that, a few weeks ago. Man, I was all jazzed about that, because that is where we're failing as a country, or at least falling behind the rest of the modern world in education within the STEM program. Or at least producing folks that can work in the STEM industry, right? Science, math, engineering, technology, we're falling behind. So if we're trying to serve our community, how do we best do that? So do we create opportunities for youths to get exposed to some type programs, for example, or critical thinking type skills? And I would argue you introduce that as early as you can, kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade, getting exposed to such as coding, Girls for Code, or Hour of Code. You'd be pretty amazed at how much kids can pick up at a tender young age, and it just starts to create thoughts and et cetera. So I share that little bit of opining of then how do we look at what this task force can make recommendations to or for. And I would argue, a youth coordinator, whatever that term is, we have one for 4-H that we're going to keep. We've had another one on the books with the UW extension system. Could that position be revamped in some way that acts at the behest of the county and coordinates with local schools or even, from an influencing standpoint for the state for education purposes of, what skills are being taught in K-12 that will support our business? Okay, that's boiling the ocean. But if we can do something on our part to help influence, and we have a youth educator that gets into our local community schools and helps parents understand that there are options versus going to a 4-year degree. For example, that there's tech colleges, there's other programming, and does that help meet, our businesses needs in Washington County? So just a couple thoughts that were going around in my head.
Thank you, sir. Other comments from anyone? I think I've probably belabored with you, probably too much about my experience with 4-H coming up through as a youth. My dad was a county 4-H club member or club leader. I was a member from as young as I could join until I couldn't be a member anymore. And my own daughters were involved with 4-H here, and they took some, I would say, some peripheral projects. But to me, the most beneficial they had was public speaking. And I don't know if this is even offered in schools anymore, other than forensics. But both the girls got involved with public speaking at 4-H, and I think it's been one of the greatest things they've ever done for professional development. They know how to organize their thoughts and get up in front of a bunch of people and not embarrass themselves in speaking publicly. So I agree totally with Supervisor Gallatin's thoughts on this.
So just to clarify, do the others on the task force agree? I mean, there was a lot baked into that thought that Supervisor Gallitz just has and trying to get a feel for if that's where we're at with that.
I agree with the experience, my kids' experience. Grandchildren.
Complementing, we know that, if you allow me another comment. So if we can help complement the educational experience of our youth in Washington County, right? It's not to take away from the programming there, but to complement it. Because the schools are limited, right? We know that. We all think kids go through school. So if we can help provide other ways to reinforce or complement or even expand, then I think the 4-H or other youth-oriented programs could do that.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that, Brian, and not only that, but that's a growing program, right? So there is more, so there's, you know, the participation levels in it are up, right? They're growing, so that's a, you know, that's a positive sign, and yeah, I mean, you know, by all accounts, you know, 4-H, and I think Ron's done a great job, and you know, from jumping to people like Bob, you know, and Lee, you know, it's a great program, and there's a lot of challenges in the agricultural community these days. There's a lot of things coming at them and a lot of need for them to adapt and grow up, adapt technology. It's certainly a huge part of that. And so, yeah, you know, yeah, Brian, I agree with you. It's wholeheartedly.
So just to clarify, I kind of edited this. Wisconsin 4-H is the premier youth development in the state, period. Efforts should be made to complement the educational experiences of our youth and reinforce. It's kind of where I lost you.
Yeah,
That's fine.
that's in essence, yes.
Yeah, I think you can stop there too.
I think his discussion, his points also open the door to the concept of expanding this to the youth educator situation to expand.
That would be a separate thought, right? You know,
It'd
so.
be a separate thought.
Correct, because we have, correct me if I'm wrong, tactically, we have the youth educator that's dedicated for the 4-H program. Then if I look at our programming, there's another youth educator, right, 0.5, I think it is, right? So if we call it our a la carte, you know, so are there services that we could tap into or further utilize from UW Extension, but then try to direct that towards more services that we believe are aligned to our constituents' needs, our community's needs, versus taking top down and those programming, thou shalt do all these. I don't know the answer to that question.
I think it just leaves the door open for that, Brian, at this point, right? That's all. Right. We're just looking for direction. So yeah, right.
Any more discussion on this point? Comments, Jamie?
Oh, I think that's good discussion.
The next point, farmers/producers are not utilizing UW Extension agricultural educators as they're getting expertise from the resources within the industry. In Friends, industry is years ahead of where UW Extension is. It's quote from the ag listening session. Professionally, I'm involved with managing agricultural organizations from around the country. We have, no Wisconsin clients, I mean, everybody's spread around the country. And I've been talking to colleagues, whether from the financial standpoint or the accounting standpoint or the agricultural consulting standpoint, literally from Idaho to Texas to Kansas to Minnesota to South Dakota to Illinois and South Carolina. And the one word that keeps coming up in regards to extension in those states is irrelevant. In terms of the cultural side of the program is of what they're learning or what's available from extension on, this is a state by state across the country, is that, as this says here, the resources are there on a local basis, whether it's through the industry, through local grower associations, or as we have here, the Cedar Creek Farmers Association. There's a lack of theory up here being adopted down here. And this is not just of Wisconsin. I know this is what we're discussing here. How can we take that information that's up here out of the Wisconsin plan, where the University of Wisconsin is available to all people across the state, but yet there's a gap, there's a void between, particularly when we're talking in the agricultural side of it. And any comments or thoughts on that?
Well, if you won't mind,
Please.
you stayed here. We're not utilizing the extension. There's still probably solutions out there that are utilizing some form of extension. And then, industry years ahead, industry still takes recommendations from extension to Madison. So I don't know if I would just say industry years ahead of where UW extension is. The quote made of one person's opinion. I still think there's a correlation where they work back and forth together. So I guess farmers are not, I would say they don't utilize it as much as they used to be, other resources for industry. And that industry years ahead, industry still relies a lot on some of their recommendations.
Particularly research coming out of university, yes.
So I don't know. This statement, to me, we're throwing them up $100. I don't think they're quite. That's how I've heard it.
So Bob, is that advancement from universities across the nation or specifically UW
I would
Wisconsin?
still think that's across the nation, and it's still, they still look to them for another opinion.
What about we do have a federal ag department, I guess. Is anything coming out of that you're aware of?
I don't know what the department's talking about, but I don't know if they do so much in education, our ag department. And USDA, their budget for the country, USDA, of 80% of it is for your staff. 4% of the actual USDA budget is in the production. Reason for that is because ag is such a minority in this country that if they don't tag it on some of these other things, they can't get anything through. Apparently right now, USDA budget for, if they extended it for 1 year and all that SNAP and all that part of it, Congress has agreed on budgeting and go through it, and the ag sector just understands the
Farm bill.
farm bill.
Maybe another way to ask this, Bob, being somewhat of a representative of farmers. So if the UW Extension dairy and crop educator were not funded by Washington County, would there be a gap?
I was pretty involved with some of the extension ag educators, and they're just recently the farm they had did some experiments, so to speak, with alfalfa production. And it's still kind of like on a local level. Whereas I think if you eliminate that, Washington County or Zaki County, again, in my case, wouldn't have the input or the resources, or in this particular thing that he did with us, they wouldn't know what information is coming out of those counties for that and to do with a alpha study, so to speak.
And that could be either multiplied based upon, you know.
I think to extension, if you have more hands-on locally than if it's just gonna be, it does one thing someplace in the state. And even these educators, when we do have our, the supplier has a meeting, something like that, they're usually invited. And they can bring their expertise that comes down from that. I guess the only comments here, I thought, I interpret that as you're throwing them under the bus. And I still think they're being utilized, not utilized to the extent they used to be, probably 20 or 25 years ago. Then I can see some, like, farmer neighbors looking at this and looking at it.
Do you think it fits better, and I know I'm skipping ahead, but if you go down 2 bullets, do you think it fits better in that context, slightly edited?
If it was up to me, I would just edit to that bullet where you start to producers, farmers. Producer farmers will utilize it to the extent they used to, and then industry still relies somehow or some wording on some of their studies or recommendations. And I don't care. That's my opinion.
That's a good question. Are you talking broadly about the crops and the dairy or one?
Well,
Oh,
So this is my, breakout group that we discussed about within my group, of the ag listening session. I think the other piece was a watershed discussion, and they really appreciate feet on the ground of someone being able to help with that watershed issue.
yes. And I recently gave a presentation for a different watershed group in Ozaukee County, down at the Alabama. And I looked into something, but they also all referred to farmers polluting over water. They referred to their educators, their professors that are doing studies on view it the way they want to see it. Whereas we need to, as a producer, you would explain to them what our professors and our university are teaching us what we do. So, we need to counter that. Yes. And I think I started originally with a little bit of one of these sessions where I'm experiencing something in our township now where the town of Trenton is really on my people, some people in the town are really on my case on the next step I need to do to be in compliance with the state. Some of those people need to be educated on what I'm gonna be more restricted and have more rules and regulations than another farmer that isn't at this size. And some of those people need to be educated on this is what's really happening. Getting us straight.
Rob, could I ask clarifying questions? I know I was at the listening session and my table, for example, the 3 or 4 producers there said they rarely used the extension. They saw that it did when they did use it, there was value, but they rarely used it. So my question to you, when you talk about the conservation and watershed, are you talking about, so I think there's a difference between accounting services and our land conservation, which we have in a fully separate budget and role and function, versus the ag educator. Or was that the difference? Was they were talking about the county's land conservation, water conservation services, or were they talking about specifically the UW Extension ag coordinator?
You're talking about Liz Gardman, so whatever her specific role. That she's with, she's extension.
And personal experience over the years of, against groups. These educators that come down from Madison, they, like Liz, they seem to have a niche that they really emphasize and push. She seems to be pushing that sector, that group of people, or some previous ones, you could tell that wasn't their niche, and then I was kind of put on that wayside.
Yes, they said it would drastically improve.
Yes. Yes.
In a positive way.
Yes, and I don't know, she actually, her and her husband actually do have a farm, and, is that one of the reasons why? I don't know. But like, in the past, you would have those that, it seems though they have a niche that, I don't know if they don't fool with, or they favor more or not, and some of the things they're supposed to do kind of, brush aside, not emphasize much, and what they seem to be interested in, they really, push for.
I think that's the ultimate challenge with extension, right? Is that when if you can just go out and contract for what you specifically need, you're gonna be far more successful than to try to have a blanket that can't boil the ocean. But right, that's exactly why we're here. Yes. But there was huge value in her being able to address that concern.
And she's a good one.
So I currently have producers, farmers are not utilizing UW Extension agriculture educators to the same extent as they are getting expertise from other resources within the industry. Does that reflect the change you made? And then does everybody agree with that?
Okay,
I mean, small, just maybe clarification again from Ron's point of view, from anecdotal and small scale, small window, that egg session was only, how many producers were there? 15? So that's a small sampling of the entire population. And again, my experience, what I heard from folks at my table was, yeah, we've used it, but maybe not as much as we could. And I asked questions, well, do you know about their website? Do you know about, and many of them were like, well, maybe, maybe not. So is that an awareness campaign?
Not to be critical, I mean, I was there. When you talk all about the small number that was there, and I always go back to the example, and a lot of people that went over there in 78, when we had an egg educator there, there were like 320 dairy permits issued. And today, there's like 28. So there were some real good operators there. The operators that get larger, they weren't really there. A lot of those that were there, well, if you go back to Centerwide, and not to be critical of them, are guys that are tired of getting out of it, shouldn't be out of it. Some of those that were there are even, like say, part-time farmers. So the ones that they're full-time grown business and everybody's getting larger and larger and larger. Personally, other than myself, and in the future, I'm gonna be small, still I am.
Well, you make, I think, a valid point for this discussion is if the scale of producers, farm producers in Washington County has changed and is further changing, become larger organizations, call them corporate or whatever, and less of the family-run farms, smaller, 3 or 30, 40, 50 head or less. You said there's only, what, 26 dairy farms?
Well, this is the Ozaki matter.
Okay.
These numbers would be similar in Washington.
It's similar. So the question then to us is, where should those, if those larger farms and the evolution and they're not tapping into the UW extension, then is funding for the UW extension educators effective, efficient use of those dollars? for a smaller number.
And I would say,
And if I want one last, and if it's being underutilized today.
I would say that, today it's still being utilized at whatever. Probably over for the next 5 years, that's gonna be being utilized. I would think the way the numbers are growing. Less in the future. I would say there's still somewhat of a need of it today. Looking at crystal ball, maybe for the next 5 to 10 years. But probably be utilized less and less in the future.
I make an observation that came off of Rob's point, and to Rob's point. And, you know, and I thought about this just, you know, that, you know, these are businesses. I don't have a full-time accountant, I don't have a full-time lawyer, I don't have a full-time, you know, IT person. I contract that personal services for these. So to Rob's point about, you know, to me, that came to my mind. I don't know if this is available, so this would be a new model, but you know, to quantify some of these things, we're talking about things and, you know, we're trying to get a sense of it. You know, you can quantify it if you get a billable for it every hour or every 2 hours. And so if there was the opportunity to enter into, you know, some type of an agreement with regard to that and see just exact, because that'll tell you exactly what the utilization is, right? Because you're gonna get billed for it and you're gonna say, boy, that's a good thing we went on a retainer and an hourly, or you look at it and say, poof, that we got blown out of the water with that extra back to the old model. But at least you'd have some quantification of it, which is right now, we're just, you know, opinion, you know, your old.
And you're only sharing Liz, will you Liz?
Okay, yep.
You're sharing Liz with the other counties, and the other counties you're sharing with are somewhat agriculture than about the election. The concept of, I think, sharing some of these services amongst the counties, I think is a good idea that we started. Continue with that until these other folks can be offered.
What would her position be reflected in this budget?
It would be the regional egg crops educator in the lower left hand shown at $11,562.
I'm saying, you know, Rob, if we were trying to quantify things, that's how you could, that's how you could nail it after a year, is to say, well, there's my billables, and here's how much, you know, they were utilized, right? Yeah, and I agree for 11 grand, I'm just saying, if you wanted to quantify it, that's how you do it. Right, you always know how hard your lawyer works for you, because every 8 minutes you get your bill, right?
It sounds like you have consensus on just generally kind of the direction and thoughts around where the egg educators are at, and that it's getting less relevant, and also, the quantifiable question comboed with, some of your comments comboed with, I think, task force member Roden, how you articulated a bunch of different things there. Is there a way you would summarize that or capture it, or do you just want us to go back and we can read the transcript as well?
I'll read between the lines here based on the last few, or at least 3 or 4 of us commenting that there's value in the egg educator for the $30,000, whatever, or less. So we may be doing a disservice to Washington County egg community if we were to no longer fund those, and those were not available to the constituents, regardless of their full use. Sounds like the crop and Liz is on top of the game. We've had a vacant dairy for 6 months? I don't know how many calls have been made to the county or to UW Extension that go outside of that person to somewhere else up north in Madison. I don't know the answer to that, but I think if we were to remove those, we would be hearing from constituents. And I would argue that if we're trying to preserve farming and farmland in Washington County, why would we remove resources available to them in their own backyard that can help them become more sustainable, profitable, whatever, so that they can continue farming if they want?
Me for the money, for sure.
Any other comments or discussion? Let's move past the bullet point on relevancy and go
Oh,
to,
hold on.
yes,
Are we keeping extension is becoming irrelevant, has become irrelevant or not?
No, I think relevancy and quantification are two different things, Jamie, in my opinion. So that's not to their, to their, that's not. So this, I'm trying to put this thought together. I think that the word relevance, and I think Bob was going there. I don't think that's right. It's just a utilization, right? If something exists, it can be a fine product, but if it's not being utilized, then it's really not, of value. But that's not, a garden hose that doesn't get used is still a good garden hose. It's just if you're not using it because you're not planting anything, and so that's not the garden hose's problem, right? It's just as the world moves forward, the way things have been. So that's just a byproduct.
I mean, to that point, still a good garden hose, but are you gonna ever use a garden hose again?
Right.
I.
Right. So I'm just
to that
saying the
point,
word.
Is it irrelevant and how much are we using is it right now? And if it's going down and we're not gonna use it, still a good garden hose, but we're not gonna use it ever again.
But for 11 grand if I need it.
I think
Well, this bullet point is broad now.
Right.
Right. I personally think that not unlike, I made some opinions about the higher education in this country changing. Well, clearly so is farming. And so is farming in every state across the country from, your 100-year-old history of small farmers. That is changing. That horse has left the stall, that ship has sailed. There's nothing we can do to backtrack that. But if we still want to support farming and producers in Washington County, shouldn't there be resources available to them versus going to the morass of Madison and floundering? Because I think that's what I heard from my table is you can't find what you're looking for. So if you have someone, and if I could use Ken's point, for $15,000, I think that's well spent.
Yeah.
And even if only 50 producers use that services, I think that's good consulting services for $15,000 for 50 producers.
Right.
That's just my opinion.
Just be your lawyer. That would buy you a- that doesn't
So-
get you a lunch.
I am just trying to help steer this conversation. So
I don't
one
know
of
what
you
the rest
wrote,
you think.
or
Is
one
that
of you
resonating?
sent in, extension has become irrelevant. And then another one of you is kind of talking about how you agree with that, and it's related to relevancy and utilization. So collectively, right, what should this say, or should it not say, and how are we coming to a consensus here?
You're saying here extension has become irrelevant to the producers and the farmers, is what you're trying to say here.
No, I'm not, we're talking about the producers or farmers. I'm talking about, I think this bullet, as it was sent in to us, was about UW extension in its entirety.
I would say irrelevant. This is, it is
Scratch.
Yeah, it's either scratched or you just say underutilized, not utilized,
underutilized.
underutilized.
That's what I've heard. And even looking back to 3 or 4 years ago, when there was the last listening session with the ag community and like 3 or 4 sessions and more participants, that was also what I got a little bit of theme. So underutilization is different than irrelevant. Because there's still use. You're saying there's still use. Your experience at your table is saying there's still use. Mine was still used, but underutilized. So again, how do you?
I think that's a better way to phrase it versus irrelevant. It's.
Yeah.
There still is a need for it, but it's underutilized. I think that's a better way to put it than irrelevant.
And,
That sounds like that's kind of the consensus here.
yeah, we're kind of fetching over this thing. I mean, for the money, we're kind of throwing nickels around like manhole cover, so let's, you know, I think we can agree that that's.
Yeah.
Underutilized is the appropriate word?
Yes.
All right. Take on the next one, Jamie. Community development, human relationship development programs. Programming holds value to this community. And it goes on to say, exercise caution, programming offering is in direct competition with private sector, such as organization design, strategic business planning, and leadership development within organizations. Programming offering is overlapping or redundant with other agencies providing services within Washington County. The question being, as an example, we had Paul Robach, who did a tremendous job in his role, but he's left us now. The role he was doing, are there other organizations that could potentially offer the kinds of counseling that he did to work with nonprofit and other organizations in their own development, their organizational programs? And I mentioned Paul strictly by, again, he was a great individual, extremely talented, but just using him as an example with the role he had here. And our programming is it overlapping? Are there other programs being put on? I'm thinking of some of the programs that Carol Freilich has done, where we worked with the elderly on education in terms of financial management. Are there other organizations, or are there church organizations, or are there lending institutions who could provide that same kind of counseling other than what the programs similar to what she was managing? I don't know. Rob, perhaps you can share some light on some of that with your work with the Y and on the other organizations that you have exposure to.
Well, and again, I just want to remind the task force that one of you wrote this, right? I think you really need to back up and say, do we have consensus on each of these components, including community development and human relationship development programming holds value? I mean, that statement right there is basically indicating that we believe it holds value collectively. So, and then the next step and the next step. So really, this is the opportunity. We collected these thoughts for the sake of this argument, but I do think we need to break this down.
So if I may offer just a quick thought, at least this has been my experience in 30 years of consulting with business leaders. When you have a vacant position, it's an opportunity to revisit what is the core purpose of that position? How has it changed over time? Because we all know this, right? Over time, you get more and more duties, and that could take away from the core purpose of that position. And is it an opportunity to revisit? All right, what should be the core purpose, and should we, you know, move things away or pull things back, or whatever the case is? So when I think about what Washington County, if I'm not mistaken, we also have under your office a community relations type person. So when I think about overlapping or potentially duplicative services, then that may not be that may be just some thoughts going through my head. But if we have some other staff within the county, why can't we utilize that staff versus, say, another organization such as UW Extension?
One comment I'll make is a lot of these other experts they came out from Extension that you've been combining over the last several years with other counties, and each county have to have their own community development person, so you combine this position with another county. And this individual served two counties instead of just one.
So I did some homework. I reached out to the 4 largest nonprofits locally and just asked them about their involvement with both of these organizations. All of them have utilized both of them over the years, without a doubt. But the 4 largest nonprofits also have other resources to be able to gain those resources or tools from that national organizations like the Y, right? Interestingly, though, they do rely on them for more direct facilitation. Then I took it a step further and I contacted Moraine Park. And I used to serve as a board of trustee for Moraine Park, and I wanted to understand because I personally didn't think they'd maybe have the capacity to help us out. And it was just the opposite. So Joanne Hall and WB, they basically contract out with all businesses for services and stuff. And they would have the ability to do strategic planning, leadership training, and facilitation. Again, that's a contracted service, it's not free, right? So I would just be hesitant to say, get away from this and not put any money aside, because probably some of the smaller nonprofits would need to utilize some of these services, and there would be a cost for that, which now they would be bearing that cost, but now they don't bear that cost for those services. That's all.
You had almost. Being able to still utilize it, limited portions.
I think, like you said, the shared, kind of the same thing with Liz, right? Is she shared by 4 counties? I mean, if you could share the community development and them by 4 counties, you're still getting that service for really great value, and probably, I'd say the capacity will be an issue.
If I may, so, Rob, you mentioned about Moraine County and other that could provide services. I agree with maybe some of the smaller organizations, not-for-profits, but I also argue that there's a value in paying for strategic planning. So every organization should be able to say, look, this is what we want to do. We need to earmark $10,000 or $20,000 for it because it's of importance to us. So to always get something for free, I struggle with that a little bit.
Well, I was gonna go to Rob's point, because when he said, well, you have that, well, there is somebody paying for that. The county taxpayer is paying for that. They are paid not by the nonprofit. Is it the job of the, or is it the fiscal responsibility of the Washington County taxpayer to fund the facilitation of nonprofits, strategic goals? And I would have somewhat of a problem with that. That's where I just look at it. And again, under the category of, I'm not gonna put nickels around like manhole covers. There's still a point to some of this,
So I would just, I don't disagree with you, but I know specifically that Paul facilitated the Vision Council. The Vision Council came out right at COVID, and it was a mental health initiative, and that really provided a lot of context in our community around mental health. That was facilitated through the United Way, and I think that the nonprofits benefited from it, but I definitely think the residents have tremendously benefited from it. So I wouldn't just say just strategic plan. Yes, I get that bucket, very specific 6-month process, but the Vision Council engaged a lot of professionals around something that was affecting a lot of our residents. So I do see tremendous value.
Additional comments or opinions?
Maybe to my earlier comment is if we have resources already within the county, could some of those services be provided by that position? If we believe it's of value to some of the organizations within the county. Or they could help direct those individuals to other free resources because they exist out there for consulting services, for example.
Okay, question for that, Jamie, maybe you can answer this. So like Julie Driscoll is instrumental in obviously this Vision Council and mental health. They probably could have led the discussion, right?
Yeah.
She was a participant, I'm pretty sure, in it versus leading. So to your answer, yes, maybe there's county resources, but they just weren't asked to do it.
I assume you're referring to the Community Development Department, which now houses 3 planners and
Right.
facilitation staff.
Right, I mean, the county took on a lot of full-time employees and expenses. This is no reflection on what they do and their value, but, you know, is there opportunity to look at that position since it is community? And this is our community, so how do we best support our community meeting our community needs? Right. Right.
Maybe we just didn't because we had extension.
Right. Possibly, I don't know. I don't know.
I don't know what the capacity is.
Again, you look at the number, 46,000, we're not gonna hire a full-time employee for that. So, you have to try to make the value relevant, right? So. The number's 150, I think it's like inward at 46.
Summary points?
Yeah, I think this is really good discussion, really good, and all holds a lot of value for the county executive. I guess I would just ask after you guys kind of talk about it, that you go back to what's written and just kind of make any tweaks to what you're seeing, just so that we know, are we leaving that? Are we, where are we at with the verbiage that's actually in front of you? Because we don't want to have something left there that maybe you guys wouldn't want, or if there's something that from your conversation that should be added as a highlight. We'll certainly add anything at the task force's pleasure.
All right, so in my opinion, the point community development and human relationship development programming holds value to this community. That's just a stop. And then it's just assessing whether or not we can, that's something we want to look at us. Our community development looking at that, or whether we want, if we see the $46,000, position from the extension, that's the better. What's the better value, right?
Yeah, meaning is that, call it programming, specific enough for being utilized by our community, right? I mean, there was a laundry list of programming under those two headings that the human and the community. And I don't know how much our community is really using. I don't know.
And Rob gave us some insight, but could that be laid on? If that went away, is there, are there other resources? Yeah, probably.
Move on.
Yep.
All right, the next 2 points really, discussion on the same topic. UW, excuse me, UW leadership is pushing institute priorities with no intent for the application within our local priorities. And UW extension is not a one size fits all for every county. I guess I watched the videotape of the meeting last week and I was quite disappointed in the presentations made by the 2 people from UW-Madison or UW extension out of Madison. Talk about activities they had done in another county with no correlation back to the needs in Washington County. And the one presenter actually just basically read off the sheet. And I was trying to find, okay, what she's reading, how does that apply to our needs and wants in Washington County? And a discussion with another supervisor this week, it just seems like too many of the programs seem to be blue sky opinions from some PhD up here that we should try this. Maybe this kind of program would work. And then that gets pushed down to the county level. I don't know if that's a truism or not, but there also, I do believe totally in there seems to be too much one size fits all. To what degree are we accommodating exactly to what the local people need?
So I do that almost like I have participate in this with somebody trying to push down us on your EVs. I think these people people sit in a cubicle someplace and they don't get in touch with reality in the real world. Brother that's a very nutritionist. Says that guys in Madison, they get focused on one thing. Bring it down, their interpretation of how something should be done. And then you get tenured or whatever. And that's gospel. Then we get somebody else in there, and the gospel for a long period of time. You won't get out there no more. And I don't know how you're gonna change that.
That's my problem with higher education and practitioners, or not practitioners, or just academia.
Well, this really comes back to the general thesis of why this group is even here. Is that are we realizing the benefit for our citizens from the monies we're putting into, if we're gonna get programs that are strictly dictated down to Madison, this is the way it'll be, you're gonna do this way, this way, this way, or this way. And are there better alternatives here within our community that are community driven as opposed to, comes back to your comment the other day on push-pull. Do we wanna push the programs through or do we wanna pull them through? And there's a difference, and I'm not sure that the woman the other day understood even the concept was here, the push-pull, it's an old marketing theory of push-pull.
Well, it's not a theory, it is what it is.
It is what it is,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah. You really push it. Full stop.
I would suggest that if we want to have a consensus point, combine the contents of those two sentences. Not a one size fits all that we need. We're looking for locally driven programs that locally benefit our residents. As opposed to, as you said, some theoretical or somebody wrote a thesis about something, now I want to put it in an application. Maybe that's being too critical. It's just, as you said, the EV vehicle situation is a very good example of that. We don't have an infrastructure in place, but you got to get the car anyway. We just combine those two into one as a consensus point from the committee. Well, it's basically combining the two, leadership. UW Extension leadership is pushing institute priorities into one size fits all programs.
And then you'd strike that next bullet, Wisconsin idea, because you just captioned the same thing, theoretical concept, you know, by faculty administrators.
Yes, yeah, it's the same thing. Those three can be combined into a very, very short sentence.
That tractor safety came up multiple times, and I did ask Marine Park about that, and they did not have the capacity to teach that class. So I don't know where that resource is gonna come from, or it came up early in our presentation about it, their department, so.
Well, didn't we find out that Farm Bureau is promoting the program? They just gotta find
They're
some.
currently having a program, and it's not that, like a four or 6 day program, so to speak. One of the requirements was that you had a teacher that was qualified to teach it. Apparently, the Watts County Farm Bureau did get an FFA teacher from Slinger. They're currently putting the program on. So, and sad to say that was brought up again because of the incident here in, Slinger with the fatality. It's been talked about several times the last several years since it's been dropped. There too, I actually brought up that, again, like, remember that we should probably work with the Watts County Commerce to sponsor it, but then make sure all the T's are crossed and I's are dotted to meet with the insurance companies will want people have to use individuals. Another one of those things where an individual county don't seem to have enough to provide it because of dwindling numbers,
Right.
but combine it with another county. And, you know,
Here's a crazy idea. So, Rob, you said, the tech college doesn't have capacity. Well, could we explore what that would mean? Does the county fund another $5,000-10,000 for capacity for an educator that would specifically schedule, contractor?
Contractor service.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's the equipment too, the other component, right? We just don't have the equipment to be able to do it.
Now, they were holding a program over at Farmers in Allen, weren't they? Yeah. You get a dealership, he says, I've got the equipment, what do you need? And you get an instructor coming in, you've got a program that's been set up, I think the Purdue program is the one that's most widely used. Here again, you're taking it back to local resources are being, they're utilized, they're finding themselves, yeah, we can make this work if we want it.
So, so it's, as far as the UW offering or taking this away from, I don't know that this is something that UW can offer. Isn't that where we're going with that? Is UW, this is something that in the end is gonna need to be more local and not with UW? Because obviously, in talking, Marine Park, to have the equipment, to maintain the equipment, to put it all out there, that's just not physically, that's not feasible. So UW offering something like this, I don't think that that's,
I think it all came from UW when it was more popular, as of years, I was involved with the program, probably for almost 10 years. Yeah, you know, every year, 15 or 20 youth taking that.
sure.
And again, with the fewer number of farms and farmers all this time, it's just like all these programs, with the numbers to utilize them aren't there anymore, just better combine them. Like, it was a tragedy what happened, it's too bad to take something like that to regenerate again. So I don't think, I think that the founders should experience that we get apparently, all you have to have an educator that experience to teach it.
Do the curriculum, implement the
Yeah.
curriculum. Well, that would be a 4-H then. I would personally think, why wouldn't I encourage 4-H to take that on? They're working with the youth.
Very well, could be.
Yeah.
Well, I think the point was those 3 bullet points could be combined into one summary.
Yep.
We've done that.
Carol, I need to be excused.
Yes, Jim.
Thank
Thank
you.
you for coming, Mr.
Yep.
Burris.
Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Good afternoon.
Next point is future discussion regarding how to best allocate dollars to retain the connection to education should consider, and this was a comment, a thought that came up yesterday. Is it feasible, as we mentioned before, you've got some of these not-for-profits who want to put on programs, but they don't have the funding. Could we take some of this funding we've got here and set up grant programs using these programs? If you want to have a program for, as an example, elderly finance management education. But they said, well, we need about $10,000 to make this happen for whatever, to get an instructor to come in and so on. But they could apply for a grant from the county, like we've done recently with the tourism situation. But we set up a funding that, okay, you've got a program you want to do. It used to be managed through extension, but you still want to do it, but it's going to cost you locally to do it. Should we set up a grant program to take some of these funds? And then the benefit to that is it's being locally driven. The local community or organization, whatever, they say, hey, we really want to do this, but we don't have the funds. Extension used to be able to provide some of this stuff for us. Can you do it? Well, that way they develop the program. They organize a grant with everything laid out with the speakers, the programs, expenses, and so on and so forth. And using some of these funds that we talked with the budget here as a grant system. So we can keep these programs alive, but the programs that are being drawn up or being proposed are locally generated. That's one of the thoughts here.
And operated,
locally, yeah.
everything.
Locally generated and operated.
For a grant saying, you know what, we want to do this, but we just need a little bit of help financially or something, but we'll
Exactly.
run the program, we'll do it all. And
You do a program like we do the other grants, you gotta apply for it, what the parameters are, what has to be done, and then a full report afterward as to how it was utilized. And then, because if they want to come back the next year to do the same thing, well, how successful was it last year? And then that's just a thought that came up. And then the workforce / manufacturing to education, this would involve, of course, more of the local industry and the local businesses. Maybe it's through a chamber of commerce, that say, hey, we would really like to have a program for whatever it may be, for workforce education or a job fair kind of thing, whatever, to use grant monies instead, so.
Yeah, and I'll just add, this was really a spot to provide any closing considerations or thoughts for the future discussion that might be necessary. So it is the idea that we would kind of wrap up this task force, summarize kind of the recommendations of where we're at with UW Extension, provide those thoughts to the county executive. And then from there, there'll be a conversation about, okay, is there additional conversation that's needed? What kind of steps are going to result from there? Likely, there'll be a new land use and planning committee, and we'll move forward from there. So really, if there's any other thoughts, recommendations for future consideration, we wanted to make sure you had an opportunity to share those, like the grant program idea or other things coming to mind.
And just for conversation here, grant money, would that be for everything? Or would we still fund UW Extension for 4-H and a couple other things, or is that grant gonna be for everything? Okay, so I mean, that's the clarification part of it. We've had a lot of this conversation, but where would that, I like the grant, I really like them letting the community, but for what aspect of that bucket?
The thoughts on that would go back to your budget, to this $148,080. In theory, this fund that's there, this would be in addition to 4-H. 4-H, I think, is the sacred cow here. We want to keep that alive in terms of, as we just mentioned, the tractor safety. Is that something that could be perhaps not put on by, but promoted through 4-H? And again, using 4-H as the driver on some of these things. Because I see a void here where and go back to using Carol Braley as an example. She was running a lot of these programs, but with her not being there, she may have been the cohesive driver behind organizing and getting these things going. Thus, 4-H might be the driver behind some other of these programs we're talking about, that they find other outside resources, but 4-H is nothing more than the driver, the organizer, the promoter. These are strictly ideas.
Well, to fill in that blank, or not the blank, to add context, that was my comment about our own community development department within Washington County. Even if it means, I know Ken, you said, whatever 48K doesn't buy you much, but depending upon how the county prioritizes the value of some of those services, so to coordinate, as Supervisor Berry said, well, is there some importance? So the HEAD program or financial literacy for elderly, whatever the case may be. If that is something that's put on 4 times a year or 5 times a year, well, that can be coordinated presumably by county staff, for example.
I would lean into Rob on that. I think that the county's done a really good job. Mental health was one of those grant programs too, right? It was able to reach more masses locally, to your point, with the expertise. The tourism grant, so I think it's a good idea. I think the county capacity is going to be your question, and I don't know that.
I think that's a very
That
well
goes
said.
along with saying that's 1/3 of the cost of a full-time employee. Aaron, I'd be right about that, right? $150,000. Yeah, so.
But we're talking, I mean, if we were to, do as part of, like, shared services, I should say.
Mhm.
The 46,000 isn't that far out if it's part of shared, if Ozaki County comes in and they paid 46, or another county, neighboring county, you know, is that the direction? If we did it shared services wise, it would expand that person more that they would reach out to, and, but I don't.
Yeah, and I think what I'm hearing, and just to clarify that, again, not know so much how we get there, but what I'm hearing you say is that these positions, whether it's through a grant program or county staff or a youth development position or whatever it looks like, there might be gaps that result from, you know, or services that come forward as these were really important to the community, and that therefore the county should look at whether it's calling MPTC and seeing if they can do it, or, you know, how to fill that gap, right? And so we don't have to decide, or we're not asking this committee to necessarily decide how they want to do that, right? If the big picture, what I'm kind of hearing you say is, yeah, we need to be thinking through all the options, and whatever that might be. Sharing the position with other counties was an idea. I mean, there was lots of ideas that came to how do we continue to make sure our residents feel, you know, maintain the programming that they find value in, however value is defined. So that's kind of what I'm hearing in this dialogue, so I'm just reiterating
Yeah,
that.
I think the consensus is there's value in that programming, but could be presented elsewhere.
And will it be able to provide all the things the county is already providing? Can you tell me someone will be more efficient in providing it?
Amy, I have a question for you. What are the counties that Liz has shared with?
Zach, can you find the line in Sheboygan?
Okay, so, I mean, obviously that's where Paul and Carol are going, so if you shared them, you could still utilize people that were providing those services locally. It just would be on a more limited capacity basis, right? And you're not losing that institutional knowledge, which I think came out multiple times too, especially, you know.
One question, and I think it's a huge question that remains to be asked, and this would involve communication back with our extension people now, with Cindy and Ron, is, okay, we've got all these ideas. Can it work? I mean, this is how we envision wanting to do some things. And of course, our county executive is going to have some input into that, and Jamie's got her comments she's summarizing from today to come back down to, okay, this is what we want to do. But I think there needs to be a conversation, and Jamie and I have discussed this already, about getting together with Ron and Cindy, say, okay, this is what we'd like to do. How can we make this work? Is it feasible? Or can we not? Or can we expand or whatever? And I think that's an element that is going to be, has to be another conversation, not necessarily involving this whole group, but just from the logistics of how can these suggestions be put to work. So
That's the integration.
yeah, how do we integrate this? Now, how do we make it happen? And of course, the same thing is going to happen if we decide to go with some of these things very community driven, whether it's a grant program or whatever else. There needs to be a lot of exposure to the public about, hey, it's here. We need to get out to all these nonprofits and say to them, okay, if you're, whatever your programs are, we may have some funding available to help you to fill the void that may have been left by positions no longer available to us through extensions. Any other comments or questions? I think you want us to wrap this up, right? Jamie?
Well, yeah, and if there's anything else this group wants to see happen, or concluding next steps as a result of the work you've done, what would that be?
Well, I would just add one more thing. I serve on the AIS board with Jamie, and I just feel like there could be more intentional involvement out at Fair Park. I mean, that's your crown jewel, and I don't know what that could be, but whether that's having extension, 4-H more present, it's an underutilized resource. I think the ag listening session, they said that multiple times. They'd like to see it being utilized.
You know, Rob, I brought that point up to Stacy. I made it stack with that 1 year stack with it. Stack with it. For sure. I'm glad you brought that up. as an AIS, I think just completely separate that.
Whatever happened with the concept of looking there the weekend?
That's a different story.
That's not good.
Well, you're talking about utilizer. I didn't think it was the best idea.
What I think you're talking about, Rob, is if you want to, if a community is looking for, a community group's looking for a place to have a meeting, have it at Fair Park. We've got various sized meeting
Beyond
groups
that.
there.
No, no,
It's
no,
be- I mean,
it's beyond that. Right.
Why isn't 4-H there all the time? Utilize the space and work together. I mean, I'd have that. Why? Because I could all my programs. I'd be there. They don't know a huge resource and it's centrally located, easy access.
Yes.
But, and if the county's gonna invest more money in there, that's, don't know if it's to be determined, but
No, it's not determined. I mean,
It's gonna happen.
yeah, I mean, we floated a bond, right? So we're,
Yeah.
we're
And you-
making improvements. Oh, yeah, 100%.
especially technology and all the things that we need to. be
Make it
more
a modern meeting place.
Right. Yeah. Great resource.
Other comments or questions?
Maybe just a little bit of follow-up. Many of us floated different thoughts or ideas that were captured, including, could there be additional partnership with, say, 4-H, for example, or the county's own resources, or shared services? This is just the meeting point.
Yes.
How do you pursue those? So I would envision, the leaders in 4-H going, oh, if we had additional funding, we could expand this program or that program, because we don't have an educator, we don't have someone that can manage and control this. So yeah, from either a grant perspective, as you threw out, Supervisor Mary, you know what, apply for 25K and you can use that towards, paying for, a 4-H leader or whatever you want to call it. If you need someone that's there permanently or semi-permanently, that's just, I think the next step is, what happens after here? And I think there's many stakeholders that have identified that, would come to the table and determine, is that something that they could do? And if so, what would they need?
We're just nudging the rock off the top of the hill. Comments or questions? Anybody else?
Well, we will definitely do a summary and share that with the group. And I guess I just want to reiterate on behalf of the county executive, thank you all for serving on the task force. And hopefully we have many more conversations in some way, shape, or form that you'll continue to be made aware of and involved in if this continues or if future conversations result, as you mentioned, Supervisor Mary.
Again, my personal thanks to all of you for giving up the time, to the committee members and for Bob and Rob for giving up your time from your work and responsibilities. I guess with that,